early and joining me for some coffee. I've got my coffee pot and my coffee cup right next to me, and we'll probably be filling it pretty regularly. Um, Hopefully, you can see the screen. I'm still kind of new to this. Um, I feel like culture and why, those two words are becoming almost overused. And yet I haven't found a better word or a better way to talk about those things. So today I want to spend some time on that, just kind of uh, sharing a little bit about how we try to be intentional about our culture at Santiago. Before I do that, I do want to thank the Minority Football Coaches Network and Coach Camarillo. Coach reached out to me just through some Twitter contact and connection, and asked if it was something that I would be interested in or willing to do, and certainly appreciate this opportunity. It's a little bit weird. I'm used to moving about the room. I'm used to making eye contact. I'm used to kind of reading nonverbal cues and kind of having a dialogue opportunity. So this is a bit of a weird format for me, and so I apologize if it is a um, little weird for you. Also, I'm going to do the best I can to normalize it. Here's my contact information. I do have Instagram, um, but as I tell my own children and my players, I'm far from an expert at it. I'm reasonably good at Twitter. Um, so getting a hold of me should the need arise, or even if it was just to reach out and say, hey, these are the ways. My uh, personal email is the Coach Mo CC at Hotmail. This is my school one. There's my Twitter handle, and then my cell number. And by all means, if there's anything I can ever do to I don't know, shed some light, help. We're going to talk about culture today, but I'm pretty blessed. I have some outstanding coaches in our program that are really good X's and O guys and really good culture guys, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity anytime we can to sit down and chat ball with guys. So don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that we can do. Uh, Little look at what I'm going to try to accomplish today, agenda wise. So the hope ultimately would be that when it's all said and done, we've obviously hit on this thing, this culture, and the term culture. And again, I apologize. I'm searching for words to replace the word culture and the word why, because they're so saturated in terms of just use for different organizations, and it's really hitting the football world pretty hard right now too. So, but again, I haven't found any words that really can replace those things. Um, so we're gonna talk a little bit at the beginning about culture, kind of generically. Talk about legacy, and our why, and connecting those things. Then I'm going to share with you kind of how I've gone through this process over the course of nearly 35 years, in kind of trying to find and live my own why, and then try to share some ideas about planning for your own why. A lot of times we hear people talking about having a why, but part of the intention of this presentation is really also about helping people to find a way to, a process for kind of identifying their why. And then I'm talking a little bit about vertical alignment, and that will make a lot better sense once I've kind of gone through all of this, and then just share at the end a little bit about how we try to build culture at Santiago. Um, so you guys, if you're in the Twitter world, certainly know this guy. If you're in the football world, you certainly know this guy, Coach Masaki Matsumoto, who's been at a couple of places. I first learned about him when he was in LA City, but have since found out that he's been in San Diego, and also know now that he is at Lincoln High School in Tacoma, Washington. And I had the pleasure of watching him present at the AFCA convention a couple of years ago. And so I stole this, and this isn't necessarily an exact quote, but I have to give him credit for this idea, because this is kind of where I got it, and it's kind of where we start in our program when we start talking about culture. And Coach said something to this effect: every organization has a culture, whether it's something that you focus on or not. So it makes sense that as a leader in an organization, you would assure that that culture is one you want. At the end of the day, if you ignore culture, if you pay no attention to culture, if you act like culture doesn't matter, you're developing culture anyway. You're allowing culture. You're allowing for leaders to develop culture. So again, it just makes sense to be intentional about culture, and to make culture a priority in the program. With that thought, the next thing then, we have to talk about culture, and sometimes we nod our heads like, yeah, I know what culture is, and yet, the reality is, do we really know what culture is? Sometimes people connect culture to just the why. At Santiago, we feel like culture is the whole thing. So culture, when you look at it simplistically, people look at culture in this order: it's what we do, it's how we do it, it's why we do it. Many of you culture people are probably familiar with Simon Sinek, and he talks about starting with why, and in his, this is a one slide summary of an entire concept and presentation from Simon Sinek. But the bottom line is, he talks about the what, the how, and the why. And so again, just as a reminder, we look at culture as being these three things: it's what we do, it's how we do it, and it's why we do it. Most times we look at those in that order. So the what, according to Sinek, it defines the product. It's what we're known for, and most organizations start with the what. The how defines our process. That's how we prepare. There are those that start with the process, and I always want to make this distinction with the how piece, because a lot of times people confuse this how thing. There's that old man perspective, I guess. Kids are different now. Kids are different now. And one of the things that people are leaning on to demonstrate how kids are different is that they need us to tell them why. And so sometimes we think of that as a why, and that's not really a why. It's really a pedagogy thing. It's they need us to tell them why. That's a way that we teach. It's a how. It's not necessarily a purpose thing. Why is about purpose. So that's the third element here. Our why, according to Simon Sinek, is our purpose. It's our reason for existence. And I've found that, you talk to people about purpose, and everybody nods their head in agreement and how important it is. And yes, the why matters, and it's a big deal. And I'm sorry, I flipped around there. But do we really start with why? Is why the place that we begin? For instance, if you're a unit leader, if you're a position coach, if you're a head coach, what's the very first thing you do when you start to prepare for the next season? I will tell you what we do. The very first thing we do as coaches is get in our room, and we have what we call a unity session. We don't draw an X, we don't draw an O, we don't talk personnel, we don't do any depth charting, we don't do any. We just talk about our purpose. And having been at the same school now for a few years, and having many of the same coaches on staff, that it seems like that would get old, and that would get kind of mundane, but it hasn't, because our purpose kind of continually changes. So how do you find a purpose? the greatest organizations understand that starting with why is what matters. Apple didn't have success with the iPhone because they're smarter than everybody else, because they came up with a technology that nobody else could do. In fact, the technology in the iPhone has been mimicked, has been mirrored, has been repeated. It's not a technology thing. But what Apple started with, instead of is what is the product, how can we make it? What they started with was, what can people not live without? What is it in people's life that they have to have? And what they needed to have was something in their pocket that they could not only make phone calls and send text messages with, but that they could access the internet with, that they could play games on, that they could take pictures with. And so in developing the product, they answered all of those questions. And so, Apple started with why, and obviously the rest is kind of history. So that's the SINEK thing. Now, if you'll remember when I started this, I said that culture was these three things, and I intentionally listed them in this order: what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. But if you take this SINEK approach, the starting with why approach, culture really is why we do what we do first and foremost. Then it is the process of how we go about it, how we do what we do. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's what we do. So it is all three things. And I feel like it's important that we lay this out, because a lot of times people who are critical of culture gurus, they get tired of hearing Dabo Sweeney and all his pie in the sky stuff. A lot of that criticism is, you don't spend enough time on football. We spend tons of time on football. Football matters. X's and O's matters. Being experts in your position matters. Learning about football from good football people, all of that stuff matters. And it's not paled because of the emphasis on culture. But at the end of the day, if we're smashingly successful with a senior class, we're going to get 8 or 9 kids that go on out of 30 to play college football. If all we care about is getting kids into college and winning football games, and if that's our only point of emphasis in our program, we're really going to let down 80, 85, 90% of our players every single year. So again, kind of just doing that what is this thing all about? Culture is the sum of all of the things that you do. And for us, we want to take that SINEK approach and begin with our purpose, our why we do what we do. And then we talk process, and then we ultimately focus on winning and losing games. So the next piece and the transition here, sorry, I'm having to move some things around a little bit so I can see. I don't know if this is affecting you in any way, shape, or form. If it is, I apologize. And I also want to remind you, while I'm kind of taking this commercial break, if there are comments or questions, or you want to go in a different direction, you want me to spend more time on any of this, throw your hand up. Apparently you can't unmute yourself. But throw your hand up, throw up a flare, somehow grab our attention. I don't have to run through this thing in this particular order. I'm just trying to stay organized. So far we've talked about, or I've talked about the culture element from an organizational standpoint, from a big picture, a macro kind of perspective. My intention really was that this presentation be one that is impacting, I guess, regardless of your role in the program. Whether you are a head coach, a coordinator, a position coach, a lower level coach, a parent, at the end of the day, everybody's responsible for the culture of the organization. And if you're going to have a culture that starts with why organizationally, then as a coach, I think individually, we all need to start with why. So why do we need a why? If the organization is going to start with why, and we're going to have a culture, no matter what, we know we're going to have a culture. It makes sense to be intentional about our culture. Then as a coach, I think that we also need to see this similarity. We are all going to leave a legacy. Every single coach, and I challenge my coaches in the room on a regular basis to close their eyes and to think back to their sophomore year in high school and put themselves in any of the classrooms that they sat in when they were sophomores in high school, and remember the name of the teachers that they sat in in a typical day. Most of them can remember one or two of those teachers. Few of them can remember all of them. Few of them can remember every single classroom they sat in. Few of them can remember all of the books that they opened, but every one of them remembers what the football field felt like, who their coaches were, what their teammates were, what they remember what the locker room was like. So the point is that this is an impacting thing on our youth. And as a coach, you're going to leave a legacy. The definition of legacy, if you were to look it up, I did, is listed right here. It's a benefaction, a gift, or an endowment. In essence, what it is, it's what we leave on the hearts of those that we serve. So your legacy as a coach is not a choice. You don't have the choice of whether you're going to leave a legacy or not. The legacy that we leave, that is our choice. And so having the intentional focus on the legacy that we will leave and being intentional about the legacy is an important piece, just like being intentional in building culture. And so what I guess I hope for out of this is to draw connection between how we as coaches interact with our players, with an intentionality and an understanding that we will leave a legacy, and making the choice to leave the legacy that we intend to leave on our players, with our players, when we are no longer together. And so part of that is finding ways to identify your why. So searching for, finding, living our why is what allows for this to happen. All right, still moving things around here. So the legacy that you leave, it doesn't just happen. Got to be intentional about it, and it is directly linked to the why. So, and I guess that's kind of what I've been trying to do in this process up to this point, is kind of draw your attention to the importance of an intentionality about culture on a more macro level, and then shift that a little bit to an intentionality about your individual why as a coach, and that why having a connection to the legacy that you are choosing to leave. Because again, if you're not going to choose to leave a legacy, you're going to leave a legacy anyway. If you're not going to choose to be intentional about culture, you're going to have culture in your organization anyway. So the next step then in this thing is my attempt to help people kind of do this. You read Twitter, you read Instagram, you find all these inspirational people who talk about the why, building culture. How do we, how important it is. It's important. We have to do it. But ultimately, sometimes they don't tell us how, or they don't give us at least some direction on how we can do this. So that's kind of the next piece of this then, is understanding that finding our why, our own individual why, it's an intentional process, and it requires reflection, which I'm going to kind of refer to as we work through this thing as the search for the why, and it requires evaluation, and I'm going to kind of determine that to be kind of in finding our why, and then it requires risk taking. and I'm going to use the term kind of living our why to identify the risk taking part of this. So I'll try not to, this isn't really about me, and I don't want to spend a bunch of time on a biography, but I do want to take you through a little bit of my search. I started coaching football in 1987, exactly one season after I'd played my last college football game at my alma mater as an assistant coach. To me, as a 22-year-old kid, the reality was that football was a game I loved. Football was a game I was pretty good at as a player, and so I wanted to be pretty good at it as a coach. It wasn't really, there was nothing about my initial years as a coach that was motivated by making others better necessarily. That was motivated by serving necessarily. So I would say that, in that early part of my career, a lot of that was a blind search for what became kind of my why. So this is the way that I've served in education over the course of 34 years. Taught several different subjects, all of which have helped for me to identify my why. Coached 2 different sports, served as an assistant coach in 2 different sports, served as a head coach in 2 different sports. I've served as a head coach in football at 5 different schools, ranging in every demographic that you could possibly hit, every level of competition, every size of school that you could possibly hit. I've served as an administrator. I've served as an athletic director, and actually I, for the last 6 years, have kind of served as a pseudo assistant athletic director, although not formally named. And the point of that is, it's been 34 years, and quite frankly, I probably found my why 5 or 6 years ago, and that was to some extent a stumble. So I've been in search. These are a few of the books that I've read. A lot of times these are slides guys want to keep. Most of you, if you're a culture guy, probably read these books, but if you haven't, by all means, reach out. I'd be more than happy to share my book list. This is just a few. I have a pretty extensive library, but these are the coaches and athletes that I've read, and all focused on culture type things. These are life coach guys. This book by James Clear, Legacy, was really kind of life-changing for me in a lot of ways. But again, all these are books that I've read. John Gordon, I actually follow him on Twitter also. He's a pretty easy read and a great follow on Twitter if you're kind of into culture stuff. And I mentioned Simon Sinek at the very beginning, the start with why thing. And again, these are non-football, non-athletic necessarily books, non-football focused, but really more intentional culture kind of focused books. When I read some of them, did I know that? Not necessarily. I was in my search. I've also done a lot of professional development and taken many classes, and these are some of the textbooks, if you will, that I was required to read as a part of professional development classes, and the things that I've found to help in my search for my why. I hope this is making sense. Let's see, did I go the right way? Yeah, I did. Very good. Coach Gant is in the room, and he's usually my tech guy. So he's probably laughing out loud right now at me as I flip through all this stuff and mess it up. But so we go from the search for our why to actually finding our why. And finding is it's a tough word, because I think finding is really more of an awareness than it is a destination. when I kind of went through these previous slides, the search for my why, I mentioned that it was kind of a blind search. That's the way it started 34 years ago, because I didn't realize that I was too young and dumb, I guess, to realize or maybe care um, about the legacy piece. But as I saw the impact I had on the players that I worked with, on the students that I taught, I began to realize there was some greater purpose. I was still searching. I didn't know necessarily what that purpose was. Um, but as I matured, I became more understanding and more aware of this need for a greater purpose. Um, as I kind of discovered my why, the things that became important to me, and I guess equally importantly, the people that I shared um, values with, and I think that's where I started to really find my purpose, my why. So just quickly on the far left here, this is my beautiful wife and I on the deck of a cruise ship, not a cruise ship, a little cruise boat. We took a bay cruise in Newport Harbor. This is relatively recently. The picture next to it is very old by many standards. This little guy right here is now 27 years old, and he's an assistant football coach and staff member at St. Joseph's Prep in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Great young coach himself, and really proud of him. This young gal right here is now married to a Marine and living in Pensacola, Florida, while he begins flight school. And she's also a tech whiz and tech in the tech industry, working remotely right now. This little one right here is now a freshman in college playing field hockey. So these are a part of my purpose also. Just as our marriage has grown stronger and we've raised our children, I've begun to find my purpose. This is the guy that hired me at my current job. And I've said this several times over the last 6 years, the job that I have. This is probably the last one. I've had a few. Don't need to go into the whole bio right now, but the part of why this is the last one is because I think I've finally aligned my values with the values of the people that I serve and work for. And so this guy's a big part of that. He's our athletic director. We work very closely together. We've had a long professional and personal friendship, and it's only grown stronger in the last 6 years. This is my current boss. He's the principal at our school, and incredibly supportive of everything that we try to accomplish in our program. And this is my former boss at this school, the guy who hired me. These are guys that helped me find my why at my current school. And quite frankly, again, it's an evolving process, but being aware that I have a why and that it matters is a part of the deal. This last picture is we're not unique in doing things to celebrate our seniors, but I have in previous lives as a head coach at other schools not done the extent of things that we've done here and seen the power. And it's one of the most powerful things we've done in our program. We call it Senior Walk. And again, I know a lot of people have it, but basically these are all underclassmen and coaches that line up this tunnel here. And our seniors start down there at the 50-yard line, and they just literally walk themselves off the practice field. We do this every Wednesday when the end of the season is imminent. So if we are playing in a week 10 game and we're not sure we're going to get a week 11, we're going to do it. Every week in the playoffs, we're going to do this. And it's incredible how powerful it is. The guys start down here at this end and kind of giggly and goofy. By the time they get down here, they are bawling their eyes out because they realize that this is coming to a close. Why is this here? Why is this a part of my why and my purpose? We've celebrated seniors at every school I've been at, and we usually do it on senior night. One of the things we discovered and realized is that senior night is very much about the parents. This right here is the end of practice, and this is our players with their coaches and their teammates, essentially kind of saying goodbye. A pretty moving thing. So again, spent a lot of time on that, but the finding the why piece is the becoming aware of the things that are important to you. I never allow myself to do any kind of presentation without celebrating these guys. This is my coaching staff. I'm incredibly lucky that these guys are willing to serve with me and serve our kids. They are experts in the field of football, specifically within their roles. But more importantly, they're incredible role models and mentors for our young men. I won't name every one of them, but again, I mentioned this guy, Coach Gant, is in the room. I saw him. So thanks for being here, Coach. I don't demand that our guys be here. In fact, I don't think our guys even knew I was doing this because I don't make a point of telling them that, because they know all this stuff. This is all stuff that we do on a regular basis anyway. So we've talked about, the whole idea of searching for the why, and then finding the why. And finding the why is really becoming aware of the why. And so I think it's important when we get to that last piece, that living my why, that it would take a moment just to kind of think about this whole thing, because we're all going to be at a different point of the why spectrum. And it's not an age thing. Like I've been blown away by some young coaches that I've come in contact with, and they're mid to late 20s, and they've only been in the business for a couple of years, but they're really connected and they really get it, and they understand who they are and what they're about and why they're doing this and all of that kind of stuff. But the reality is we're all at kind of a different point on the why spectrum. And I think it's important, if we're going to serve our student athletes, that we be intentional about our why. And so finding and identifying where we are in that why spectrum is kind of an important thing. Finding ultimately your why, determining your why, is not a simple process, nor is it one that has an end, which is why now we get into the taking risk part of living our why. So I'm going to take a little risk and talk to you about our sharp football culture. We said we start with why, the inner part of the circle, the Simon Sinek circle, if you know that. So here's what ours is. Our purpose is developing men of significance. That's our mission. That's our purpose. That's our why in our program. And so every coach's why, whatever it is, needs to be aligned in some way, shape, or form with that purpose. I talked also about how important it is in our culture that we understand that the how and the what are part of the culture. So because I'm emphasizing the why right now and helping to plan, I don't want to get into a lot of detail on this, but I do want to share with you that, we emphasize the how part of our culture also, the daily improvement in the mastery of football skills and techniques to accomplish our goals. We call it practice, we call it training, we call it film study, we call it meetings, we call it all those things we do this is an important part of our culture. It's why when I walk into a room for a full team meeting, I ask our guys to take their hats off. It's kind of an old school thing, but it's a part of our process. It's a part of what I do. But I don't require that of every one of my coaches when he runs a meeting. It's just that those are all parts of the things that we do. It's keeping the why and the how connected, and then ultimately our product. At the end of the day, we're gonna be a team that plays games and wins some and loses some and has a record and is judged and all of that kind of stuff. But if this is the driving force, if what is the driving force, then we're setting ourselves up, I think, for failure. So we try really to focus on everything starts with this, our purpose. The reason I put these other two in here for the purpose of this conversation today is because I don't want anybody to think that this is all we do. that, you know, we're still focusing on being great in football also. Um, you can find this on the internet if you were to look for a man of significance, but this is where our mission ultimately came from. It's a essay written by this guy, and I'll be honest with you, I did a Google search for inspirational things at some point 4 or 5 years ago, and this thing popped up, and I read it, and I said, "Wow, this is really cool. I'm going to take it." So I'm not going to kind of burden you with reading this whole thing, but if it interests you, you can Google search. You can Google search men of significance, and this guy's name, which I cannot pronounce, and I would be doing him a disservice to try. Or you can shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to share this with you. Shoot me a DM, however, whatever. But this is what drives us in our program, is developing men of significance. So understanding that being intentional about culture starts with why. For us, we talk about a culture of excellence. I'm going to get into that a little bit towards the end here. But also recognizing that it's a fluid process, and it's developed over time and requires constant reflection and adjustment. That's the you know, you're gonna search for a why, and it may be a blind search. You may not even know you're searching. That's what happened to me. Then you're going to kind of find your why, and that's when you're in that awareness stage where, well, you know, we recognize that we have some greater purpose than just teaching ball, some greater purpose than just being the expert in the room. And when we've established or reached that point where we've searched and found, we now are obligated to live, and that's where we're in a constant state of reflection. And so it's not, we don't find a why and say this is the why and it's the be all and the end all and it's always going to be the same. You know, we're constantly challenging ourselves to be better at our why. So I want to share with you a way that hopefully you individually, and this worked for me, which is why I'm kind of just hoping that this is something that you can take from this. I call it an upside down approach. So if you think about the way organizations are structured and the way that that culture is built in an organization, it always seems to start with that overarching mission statement. Our mission statement used to be a paragraph long in our football program, and ultimately we cut it down to a very short statement. But you know, typically you start with the mission statement, then you talk about your core values, then you get to the nuts and bolts, right? Urban Meyer calls these guiding principles. And essentially those guiding principles are the daily execution of the core values which guide us. So to me, this upside down approach in terms of planning for your why and finding your why and living your why is really taking a look at the things that you do actively in your life that reflect your core values. And I'll share with you some of the things that we do in a minute, but simple things like I hold the door open. I say please and thank you. I say good morning. I smile at people. I have this thing about in my personal life, you know, without giving you, again, the details of some of these things don't necessarily matter, but I got my butt fired. I joined that club of coaches about 10, 12 years ago now. You know, the ones who have been fired and the ones who will be fired. Well, I transitioned from the will be fired to the have been fired about 12 years ago. And it was a really rough time. And after a couple of years of feeling sorry for myself, I ultimately kind of just decided that I was no longer going to have bad days. And so what I did, my daily execution, my guiding principle, I called good or great. And the reality is, every time somebody said, "Hey coach, how are you?" I always answered good or great. And it was a intentional process in the beginning. that I had to be conscious of and conscientious about, because it would have been really easy to say, doing okay, thanks, or I'm okay, or, but instead I would say, great, thank you, or good. And so my answer is, to this day, when people ask me how I'm doing, is always either good or great. That's a daily execution. Um, it's a guiding principle. So we start at the bottom. We start with the things that we do with intention that reflect our core values. Once we kind of identified those, then we start dialing into giving a name to those important traits and characteristics that are necessary for us to achieve our why. We call them core values. I learned from um, um, Coach, oh gosh, I've forgotten his name, the coach at Memphis, Neville, I think, Mike Neville. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. It does matter to him, and I apologize. But he talked about the core values of their program, and he had created an acronym for that. So we've done the same thing in our program. But whether you create an acronym or just know the words, like the characteristics that are important, that you identify as your core values: hard work, perseverance, trust and love, and those kind of things. Those are your core values. And ultimately then you use those guiding principles to determine your core values, and then you determine your core values, and from there you create a one sentence statement that says, this is who we are. So you can do this for yourself. You can have your own mission, your own core values, your own guiding principles. And that's a way that we find our why. Here's what we did in our football program. We started, now this has been a process now. We started 6 years ago, upside down, the other way. We started with our mission. But now the first things we talk about every year in the very first coaches meetings, we start with our guiding principles, and we want to make sure that those guiding principles are things we can live with. For instance, maintaining high standards, building culture, and eliminating BCD, blame, complain, defend. It's an Urban Meyer thing. Most of you probably have heard of it. Those three things were our guiding principles until last year. And last year in coaches meetings and our coaches unity sessions, we decided that showing gratitude mattered too. That was another way that we were going to live daily to reflect our core values. And so now we maintain high standards always. We build culture always. We eliminate BCD always, and we show gratitude. Those are our guiding principles. Our core values then are in this acronym TRAIL. Our core values are trust, respect, availability, accountability, investment, and love. And we feel like if you are living by these guiding principles, that you are demonstrating these core values. And ultimately, our mission, as I shared earlier, is developing men of significance. And we feel like if we are living these guiding principles, we are also demonstrating these core values. And so we are achieving our mission. Again, this is something that can and should be done on a very individual basis. What's important to you? How do you behave that demonstrates the things that are important to you? And then how can you encapsulate that into one short sentence? Guiding principles, what we do, that identifies what's important to us and what kind of what our why is. The core values, those characteristics or traits, it doesn't have to be an acronym. And then ultimately this kind of one sentence thing. So we take an upside down approach to developing our why. Here's the important piece. All of that stuff, all of that culture stuff, again, Dabo Swinney doesn't build the culture at Clemson, at the University of Clemson, without buy-in from every single person in his building. And buy-in is not a tacit agreement to say, yes, Dabo, you're a genius. Buy-in is emphasizing that culture in the role that I have. And does that mean that every single person in the University of Clemson football program is a Dabo Swinney? No, they're all their own people, but they all contribute to the culture of Clemson University football. And so I challenge you. There's probably other stakeholders in our high school football programs, in our college football programs. But at the end of the day, head coach builds culture. Coordinators build culture. Position coaches build culture. Lower level coaches build culture. Administration builds culture. And this is a key one. I had a conversation with a football player who had gotten in trouble. We were called to a meeting with our athletic director and an assistant principal. I basically listened while our athletic director talked to our former football player about the trail, walking the trail. This came from the athletic director. We talk all the time about walking the trail in our program. Our administration talks to our players and other athletes in our program about walking the trail. So they're helping us build culture. Our players have to build culture. And this is the hardest one, folks. You know that. Parents building culture, it's hard. But when parents start talking about your pad score, I got 2 emails this week about our kids' pad scores from parents because the parents wanted to build those pad scores. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But parents are intentionally building culture and helping to build culture when they invest at that level. So if they're involved in your program in any way, they are culture builders. Here's what I'm talking about: vertical alignment. Wherever you fall on this, and this is ours, in the left side is basically specific to our school. So this is our district, this is our school, this is our athletic program. These are the head coaches of our athletic programs. These are the assistant coaches, and these are those support personnel. Every one of these has to have a why, and they don't have to be the same why. They all have to be in alignment with one another, however. So if, as the head football coach, my why and our program why doesn't match with the why of the athletic program, we have a problem. But if my why does, then we're vertically aligned and we're good. So the right side is the emphasis here. To effectively build positive culture in any organization, there has to be a vertical alignment of the mission, core values, and guiding principles. Notice it doesn't say they have to be the same. As a freshman wide receiver coach, your personal mission, your core values, and your guiding principles do not have to be identical to those of the head coach, but they have to be in alignment with those of the head coach, because those of the head coach are what the program represents. I hope that makes sense. Ultimately, your why must serve that of the others in the organization. I hope that makes sense. So how do we build culture? And I'm getting close to wrapping up here, and we'll take questions or comments if y'all have them. And I appreciate you hanging with me here. But I want to start on the right here. First of all, these themes, these are things we talk about all the time, and our coaches are great about it. I listened to one of our coaches in a meeting the other day, specifically mentioning excellence mindset. We talk about success versus excellence. We talk about the legacy we leave. We talk about being perfect in the moment. Is it possible to be perfect as a human being? No. Is it possible to be perfect in one moment of time? Absolutely. So we talk about that a lot. We talk about service. We talk about selflessness. We talk about a sense of urgency. These are all regular themes in conversations we have with our players as a part of building our culture. These are the processes and actions that we take to try to continuously be aware of building our culture. So I mentioned our coaches meetings. The first 4 to 5 coaches meetings we have starting in January every year. All we do is talk about culture. We talk about purpose. We talk about how we're going to build our culture. We have player unity sessions, which are all culture-centric things. Sometimes they're player-led, more often they're coach-led, more often than that they're head coach-led. But we've had them all. We've brought in guest speakers. But the point is, every one of these player unity sessions are culture-driven. We've developed what we call a coalition of culture. Others would call it a leadership group. This is a group of players who have accepted the responsibility to place the culture of our program paramount above all other things. and they're really pretty darn good about it. Guys who are starters and lose their starting position that happen to be a member of the coalition of culture, they have to handle that. They have to handle that better than anybody else would, because it has happened, and it probably will happen again. So these are guys that kind of drive our culture from within the player group. I challenge our coaches not just to walk the trail, to do the things that we talk about, our guiding principles, but to talk it regularly. And we never break a full team function in any way except for trail. It's always trail on me, trail on three, 1, 2, 3, trail, and we're out. Now, when we're in smaller groups, we allow them to break in different things, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But our coaches are really good about challenging guys to be on the trail all the time. Pads is brand new. We decided this year that we're gonna create a competitive environment for our players based on their performance, their attendance, their discipline, and their service. And we have a very kind of complicated formula, but it's not that complicated. That we basically measure the players against each other, and who's performing the best, who's attending the most, who's demonstrating the most discipline. And discipline is falls into a lot of different categories. And then service, because we're service oriented, we're others oriented. And I talked about the email. I got 2 emails from parents asking for service points for their players, because during this COVID-19 time, one of the players had cooked dinner for his family 2 nights in a row. So I gladly gave service points for that. And the other was a picture mom sent me of the player cleaning the pool. And she indicated that he had spent 40 minutes doing that. So he received service points. I'm happy to share this with anybody who wants to talk in more detail about this. To be honest with you, it's a year 1 for us, but we feel like it's going to be a really good thing. Other ways, processes, actions. We celebrate position and unit culture. I know our D line, we talked about breaking out with trail. Our D line breaks out with EAT. EAT is an acronym for them, and those 3 letters represent their core values. Our wide receivers break out with fly high because they want to fly high. Our linebackers break out with black ops, and that's an acronym for them. So we don't require everybody to break out with the same thing. But that's a way that we build culture, because we're building position culture, and that culture is going to be vertically aligned with the program culture. And finally, these guiding principles things. If you come to our practice and watch us finish anything, practice, weightlift, whatever, the one thing you will find, I don't know if it's unique or not, but it will stand out and be evident to you. Every player fist bumps, thanks, handshakes every coach before we leave. Now, this COVID-19 thing, things might change a little bit, but it is something that we've emphasized in our program. So I've sprinted through that stuff. Here's my contact information once again. I'm happy to share the presentation with anybody that wants it. I'm also happy to sit down and chat via any medium that works for you. Again, I want to thank Coach Camarillo and the MFCN for doing this and providing me this opportunity. I enjoy talking culture. I know a lot of times, you'll get 300 guys in a room to talk about the zone read or the tight defense or how to backpedal right and all that kind of stuff. And those are important. And I think there's a lot that can be learned football wise and all that. But at the end of the day, this is the stuff that I value. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we do. We serve youth, and it's incumbent upon us to leave the world a better place. And we're going to do that by leaving our players in a better place than we found them. So again, thanks. And I'm happy to take any questions now, or happy to field any phone calls or chat in any medium that you want. So thanks again. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Coach. I appreciate it. Well, I tell you, I took a ton of notes, and it's all good stuff. And as you mentioned, we could talk X's and O's and and footwork and, you know, all the football stuff that we all live for. But, you know, this is huge for any organization, any coach, young coach, old coach, players, parents. You know, you got the whole thing going. And I know you spent a lot of time in building this. So we appreciate your time. Guys, got any questions for Coach?
Now with what this wants to do, and I think we just need to suck it up and live with it and just go for it.
Okay. All right, guys. I appreciate you. Everybody, have a great day. Thanks again, Coach Morrison. I appreciate you. It's been fantastic, and can't thank you enough for everything. And we'll stay safe out there, and we'll talk soon, Coach. Thank you very much.